All right. Okay, average debate enjoyer. How's it going?
Oh, it's going. Let me mute the stream really quickly. All right, we're
Okay.
good. All right, so I got a good one for you, and I think I can sell
One
you on
sec,
this
one
one.
sec. I got
Oh,
desktop audio muted. There you go. Now you're good.
I think I can sell you on this one too.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about the conspiracy theory of systemic racism and how that resulted in rioting in Kenosha, Wisconsin, based on lies around a gentleman named what the fuck was his name? Oh, damn it, I just had it in my
Blake.
head. Jacob Blake. Yep, Jacob
Jacob
Blake.
Blake.
And how the conspiracy theories around systemic racism that hasn't actually been proven resulted in a dangerous riot that left a bunch of people injured and several people dead.
Yeah. I mean, it's what you'll find is for those that don't know, Jacob Blake, there was Kenosha, which is where Kyle Rittenhouse was at, where he ended up shooting and killing a person. There were riots occurring there, and the reason these riots started was it was during the George Floyd riots, right? And it was another situation where a black man supposedly was shot in the back. I forget how many times, like a dozen times or something like that. It might not have been that exact number or that much, but he was shot in the back quite a few times by police, and that was the narrative that people ran for. Oh my God, they shot an unarmed man in the back. When the facts came out, what really happened was the police were called because Jacob Blake went into his baby mama's house, got in bed with her, was trying to assault her while her toddler's child was in the bed. He then proceeded to try to flee and kidnap the children. He had a van where he had the children placed in. When police confronted him, used tasers and stuff like that were ineffective. He then made a dash for the van where he had a knife, which police were able to see as they screamed at him to stop because they feared he would either run away with the kids in the van or would use the knife on the police officers or the children. So, because they had exhausted all means, they ended up firing upon him, which he didn't even die, I don't believe. Um, Despite this, the narrative was already set that this was another unarmed black man. This was a bad shooting by the cops. And the conspiracy theory on this was so impactful that basically the local police stood down because they didn't want this to become. I can't speak to exactly why, but it seems that part of the reasoning would be they didn't want to be the next ones on the national news. You didn't want to be Joe Schmo, street officer in Kenosha, and all of a sudden you see Black Lives Matter rioting and step in and spray mace them or something, and the next thing you know, your name's being broadcast. So they just let it go. And I've been saying the entire time during these George Floyd riots that I didn't that what was going to happen was because all of these left-wing cities were allowing these riots to occur. It would go like the Rodney King riots where you saw Koreans that said, "Well, fuck this. We're going to take matters into our own hands." And to me, that's the worst case scenario because now you have Americans using lethal force on other Americans. And I was on here every day. People that follow me saw that I was on here every day talking about that. I was like, I'm not a big fan of sending in the National Guard. I'm not a big fan of huge military presence, but something has to stop this. Because if we just say, well, people are upset, let them burn things out, real people's lives are being ruined. And eventually they'll say enough's enough and they'll try to defend themselves and someone will be killed. And that's exactly what happened in Kenosha. Now, that was a legitimate conspiracy theory that was mainstreamed by our media and prominent Democrats, and it literally led to a horrific outcome. That's what happened. The problem is, and we'll see this in my debate Monday with this Mojo guy, the term conspiracy theory has two meanings. It has the meaning that we might be able to agree with on paper, that just offshoot in the top of my head, conspiracy theory would be a theory involving a conspiracy, which would be defined as two or more people planning for a nefarious or illegal purpose to have some sort of plan for some shady enterprise. It's not the best definition, but people kind of get what I'm saying. That's the legit definition. But the way it's used by the people that shape our narrative is anything that we disagree with. Right. So they'll look at a literal conspiracy theory like hands up, don't shoot, or Kenosha, or Trump colluded with Russians. And they'll say, yeah, they don't call that a conspiracy theory. Technically, it is a conspiracy theory what the government just arrested Trump for. That him and a bunch of people conspired to basically steal the 2020. That's a conspiracy theory, right? any theory that you have that's not proven yet that you suspect and that is a conspiracy theory. Many of the, like something as simple as I think these 5 people plan to rob this bank. That's a conspiracy theory, right? But it's just that we started the people in positions of power put a negative connotation on that. They use conspiracy theories all the time. Uh, but yeah, I agree with you. That's why I don't say that there's an inherent danger in being a quote conspiracy theorist. There could be an inherent danger in how you push it. But for me, I don't even mind the people. I don't think that you should be judged that violence occurred if you bought the Kenosha narrative, right? Unless you're out there saying we need to use violence now. But I do think, and I try to say this myself, I try to constantly, when I talk about these serious things, have an appeal to never use violence. It's not morally acceptable and it's not strategically acceptable. And to also talk about actual remedies and actual facts to the best of my ability before I jumped the gun. And that's why my big quote conspiracy theory, it's not even proving that Joe Biden committed a crime or that Hillary Clinton committed a crime. It's showing the double standard from our institutions like the FBI. And I think I've made that case undoubtedly. I think anyone who's objectively looking at even the most base of facts has to admit that there's a blatant double standard in the way people connected to Trump or people, not even Trump, like people like Tulsi Gabbard or Jill Stein or even Bernie Sanders in 2016, people that are considered outside the orthodox establishment, how they get treated by these institutions versus how people that are inside it get treated.
What I want to do more is take a step back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the conspiracy theory is systemic racism. Now, akin to the Jacob Blake reporting is your speculation about Joe Biden. I think your speculation is warranted because it's what one side is alleging and saying that they're going to be able to prove by the end of the investigation. So I think it's good speculation based off of at least enough evidence to have that speculation merited. I want to take a step back and say the theory itself is systemic racism. That's the conspiracy theory, and Jacob Blake was just something that ignited the fire underneath it. And for more for
That's
that
sort
regard,
of that's sort of true, right? Like, but there is the specific conspiracy in that example is the Jacob Blake story. But yes, there is this background of all of our institutions are systemically racist. And that is in itself a conspiracy theory. They would deny this. They would say, no, 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 it's only a conspiracy theory if you think that it is conscious racism, right? So they would say, we're not saying that, President Bush and Vice President Cheney and, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Supreme Court are consciously racist. We're saying all of these institutions are subconsciously racist or by their very existence are racist or by their very foundations were racist. And so they would say it's not a conspiracy because it's not a bunch of people sitting around saying, let's screw over black people. It's a bunch of people by the very positions that they have been set forth that they have no choice but to be racist. I agree with you, though. I do think that it's a conspiracy theory because think about this. One of the things they would say about me being critical of the FBI is, well, think of how many people have to be involved in this theory. And it's like, okay, well, if you believe in systemic racism, that's literally millions of people that would have, like, every person who's worked for the government or a major corporation, like, all of them would have to be racist, and they're covering it up. And so they would say, no, 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 they don't even know. That's why it's not a conspiracy theory. So if I'm trying to steel man them, that's what they would say, I think.
well, spawning off of this systemic racism is the theory that everybody that wants to continue the system that we have is propping up a form of white supremacy. And it's a bit of sleight of hand using the term white
Mm-hmm.
supremacy because they mean you're setting up a system where white people inherently benefit more. And then using that, they're switching the term white supremacy to be the classic term where we think of white nationalists and neo Nazis, and then using that to smear people like Donald Trump as a neo Nazi. So from that, you get the next step, which is these are actual Nazis, and it's okay to go out and commit assault against them because your lives are in danger. There's a trans genocide, there's a black genocide,
Right.
and you need to defend yourself. So I really think right there is a really good argument of how conspiracy theory could easily materialize into violence. And we do
Well,
see a
yes, and then that is true, right? So let me put it this way: some conspiracy theories could easily translate into violence, but not all conspiracy theories should be shunned. Theories could easily translate into violence, but not all conspiracy. Sky guy, I got to put you out for now. Sorry, I'll bring you in. Yeah, when we after we leave Average Debate Enjoyer go. Sorry, but yeah, so I agree with that, you know. As to like you have to be careful, and this is something I am aware of this on my side of the ledger. You know, after January, let me be honest with you. I don't think that there was this massive conspiracy to plan an insurrection and overthrow of the government on January 6th. Do I think there were people that would have like would have taken horrible actions if they had the backing? Of course I think that, but I don't think that I think almost all of what happened was a spontaneous people getting caught up in a moment. Doesn't justify it if they engaged in acts of violence. I'm not saying that, right? But I do say that it is true that after January 6th, I don't know if it's because I have a little more foresight and free time in my hand to kind of, come up with opinions, what's going on. I knew exactly. You go watch my shows right after. I had a video like 1 p.m. on January 6th calling out like this violence is fucking stupid. It's going to bite people in the ass. It's going to end any hope we had of, getting answers to questions with the election, etc. And that's exactly what happened. I knew that would be the case. And I was dealing with people, right-wing people calling in my show saying, but Rob, sometimes the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed with the blood of tyrants. And I'd be like, shut the fuck up. No. Like as soon as you like that is morally unacceptable, but it's also strategically unacceptable. And once you accept that, once you accept all hope is lost, and therefore, then you make violence inevitable. And that's not the way to go. That's morally not the way to go, but it's also not how you win this battle, right? So I always try to make it a point to tell people why that violence is a bad idea and it's not justified. Now, counter that to what you see in the left of people that'll say things like, there's a trans genocide. Okay, what does that mean? I think that's total bullshit, but let's say you believe that. Well, many of these people, what's the message they're talking about? Then you need to arm yourself. And we have to stop the, like Vosh, Vosh would say, there's a trans genocide. We stopped the What if we could have stopped the Nazis before they came into power? And I wish they would have shot at people out windows at the Patriot Prayer Rally. Shit like that. Now, they don't get community strikes. They don't get censored on these platforms. They're promoted. Yet there are thousands of young, impressionable people that listen to that shit. And then they'll have the nerve, that crew will have the nerve to then watch me be like, well, I think Weiss is trying to cover up the crimes of Hunter Biden. They'll go, that's dangerous. That's a dangerous conspiracy theory. Well, what about that is me suggesting that violence should entail? I'm suggesting that we vote out rhinos that are allowing this stuff to occur and left-wingers that allow this stuff to occur and get people that actually want to represent the people of this country and fetter out this corruption. That's my suggestion, and that we start changing things in our own lives and our own culture to the best of our ability to make sure that we're living in a way that I think is more in line with the foundational principles of this country. And yet I'm accused of being a dangerous conspiracy theorist by the very people that talk about, well, the whole country is systemically racist. Like, what would I talked about this to that guy, Food Shops, that I was debating the other day, or woman, I'm not trying to intentionally misgender. You know, this was the point that we got hung up with, and I was just, fucking, I'm done, right? If you're going to say Trump incited violence by saying, I think the election was stolen, then how can you not say that people incited violence that said every institution in this country is systemically racist? Wouldn't that also have the effect of people going, oh shit, I have no hope. Every institution's racist against me because I'm a person of color. So therefore, I'm going to take matters into my own hands. Now, I don't blame that person for saying that every institution is systemically racist. I blame them if they're making calls to violence. But yeah, you're right. It's difficult because you could see the predictable results. I'm not saying you can't talk about that. I think you should be allowed to talk about your belief that institutions are systemically racist. But I think that you should be careful to let people know that that doesn't justify violence and things like that. And you certainly then don't have the right to get on your high horse and demand other people shut up when they're talking about things that you view as untrue conspiracies. But what separates me from that, in addition to me specifically condemning calls to violence, is that I'm also giving specific examples of the specific, quote, conspiracy that I'm talking about, right? So I'm not just making a vague statement like the FBI hates all white people or the FBI hates all Republicans. I'm saying we could see the double standard in the investigations, people connected to outsiders versus people that are considered establishment people. And here's 50 examples. To me, I think that's what sets it apart.
So Real quick, just to kind of address one of the points you brought up.
Yeah.
One of the arguments I've been giving, and I have a sit down with a guy named Portland is Burning that thinks that January 6th was incited by Trump. The independent elector theory is something that was tested in a 2015 SCOTUS case, and three seated justices that are still on the court, plus Scalia, all ruled in favor of the um, independent electors theory as well. So it's not like it's a bunch of fringe lawyers. These are four Supreme Court justices that said it does have some validity. So it's not really. And then when Trump was denied, he peacefully stepped down from power on January 20th, exactly how he was supposed to. But that being said, going from your. So I got you kind of saying that these conspiracy theories can lead down some dangerous paths. Now
Mhm.
let's kind of pivot to one that's a little more bipartisan is on the right, you'll see the cabal of Jews that run the world. There's a lot of anti Jewish conspiracy theories.
Mhm.
Their definition of Zionism isn't just the existence of Israel, which is what Zionism actually means.
Sure.
It's that they want to take over the world. And that justifies a lot of the violence. And then on the left, you'll see a lot of black Hebrew Israelites and things like that saying that all the Jews were actually black and a bunch of white Europeans took it over and blah, blah, blah. And that justifies their giants against, or the violence against them as well. So you see
Mhm.
that Jewish people per capita are actually the most attacked in terms of violent hate crimes as a result. So it really does result in violence a lot more often than I would like to. I don't mind speculation. I don't mind conspiracy theories, but it does lead down the path of violence quite often more than it should. So I
I
would say,
can't. It's certainly. I'll say this. Anytime that you're saying that someone based on immutable characteristics is somehow evil, you're already massively screwing up, and that's to put it lightly. You know what I mean? Like, I don't get it. Like, I debated JF Gary Epi and Sean Last one time, sort of on the ideas of white nationalism. It was actually me and Andrew Wilson against them. And one of the things they said, like the way that they think, it just blows my fucking mind. Like we were talking about Rittenhouse, and they were like, "Well, all the jurors and the prosecutor, they're all Jewish." I was like, "What? Really? What are you talking about?" And I started looking up names. Now I know you can't tell someone's ethnicity specifically by their name, but they had some very non-Jewish sounding names, and they're like, "Well, not that one." And I'm like, "Okay." Like, well, you said everyone. So, once I understand, like, the problem is with that, they'll believe like anything that you point to. I think that the way to deal with that is you actually have to understand that both of those groups have criticisms that are somewhat grounded in fact. Any sort of movement that gets legs, even the most heinous of movements, has some sort of kernels of truth in them, or else people wouldn't buy into them in the first place, right? You have to appeal to something inside people, even if you're like, I forget the name, the cult leader, like the Kool-Aid person, and like they had to have something to offer people. And for me, when I hear from the right, like the alt-right sort of people, I think that one of the things that happens is, thank you, Ranger and Rogue, for the raid. I really appreciate it. I really do. One of the things that happens is people don't take seriously legitimate things they talk about, right? So actual bigotry that occurs against white people or institutional bias against white people. That shit's real, but it doesn't justify this. Therefore, I hate all Jewish people. Not in my mind,
yeah. So
And so what happens is, you take this kernel of truth, and then what's the response from the left? That's all bullshit. You're white. The country's systemically racist from white people. And so, like, I know, like, I'll give you a story. I grew up in a small, I lived 20-mile radius my entire life here in rural Pennsylvania. And I used to bartend. And one of the things I would hear from people, almost everyone was white in my little town, but it's poor. It's a very poor town, a lot of drug problems. And there were a couple people that would come in the bar all the time that had been to prison, white guys. And they would say, the most persecuted person in this country is the white man who's been to prison. No one gives a fuck about me. I can't get hired anywhere. There's no group. Speaking, I'm just shit. I had every advantage in the world and I pissed it all away because I'm white and I went to prison. And they sort of have a point to an extent. Now you might say, well, what's your circumstance? Did you do something terrible? Oh, you assaulted your girlfriend? Yes, you should have went to prison. But just in general, the speaking of that, like you could see how people like that would get disenfranchised and say, well, here's a group that's accepting me. They're saying, you're right. You're absolutely right. And so you're right. Those conspiracy theories obviously could lead to violence, and it can be bipartisan. It's certainly true. I don't think that there's a problem questioning the United States stance towards Israel. The law, I even defended people I don't like. You remember? Do you remember this incident when Ilhan Omar talked about AIPAC and she said it's all about the Benjamins, and everyone was like, "That's anti-Semitism." I said, "I don't know. Maybe Ilhan Omar's an anti-Semite, but that's not proof of it." I mean, she could legitimately just be meaning AIPAC spends a shitload of money to politicians in this country. That's not anti-Semitic. That's not, saying I hate all Jewish people. That's criticizing Zionism, criticizing, the lobbying from government institutions in Israel to the United States government. Um, but yeah, you're right. It could get out of hand quickly. Again, that's why I try to focus on, you'll notice, I would say that the dangers of that are when you were saying that people are judged guilty or somehow immoral based on immutable characteristics. It becomes that's a very bad start.
Yeah. Well, even if like people conspiracy theories.
Real quick, thank you, Drew the Dogman, through the super
Yeah.
chat. I really appreciate it.
Conspiracy theory that like leftists are perverse, and there is a kernel of truth to that. Like I'd say, like when Pisco wipes his butt, he sticks his finger up there and gets a little.
He's
joy out
watching
of it.
right now. Yeah,
I know. I see him in the chat. But that being said, like there are some kernels of truth to there's a lot of Jews in power, there's a lot of Jews in the media and blah blah blah. But when you actually look at the fundamentals of their ethnicity and religion, there's a lot of emphasis on studying, working hard and driving yourself forward, and that is ingrained in their culture. So it's pretty obvious you'd see a higher rate of success from those particular types of people.
Well, it's funny. I find white supremacy the argument to be counterintuitive on its face, right? Because, like, let's say that you have a group of people of color, and they'll look at metrics and they'll say white people per capita make more money, and white people per capita are less likely to go to prison, and white people per capita gets lesser prison sentences for the same case, right? And the basically the white supremacist type people would answer that by saying that's because white people have a better culture or a better biology or something to that effect, right? So the outcomes are the unequal outcomes don't prove bigotry, which I agree with that portion of it. Unequal outcomes don't on their own prove racism or bigotry, right? And they would say that's because we're biologically better, or that's because we're culturally better. And then it's like, okay, now do Asians, now do Ashkenazi Jews, right? And they'll be like, well, that's because they game the system. And it's like, you're literally making the same argument that the people of color are making, right? Or not all, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all people of color, but you see what I'm saying, right? And so it's like, I don't know how, you could make the argument for white supremacy, because if we look at most outcomes, there's a lot of groups that outperform traditional white people in this country, so yeah, it's again, I don't think, and this is going to be a problem, in that unless you take a definitive side on an issue, almost all of us on every issue are discussing things in a manner of thresholds, right? So I'm not a complete anarcho-capitalist. I believe that some form of government should exist. And let's say you're on the left. You're probably not a full-fledged authoritarian communist that's like the government should control every aspect of your life. So at some point, we have a threshold that says, well, this is our cutoff where we think the government should stay out. Your threshold might be, well, I think the government has more of a say. But those extremes are the only two sides that will always be able to say it's real simple, it's cut and dry, it's black and white. The rest of us are playing in some shades of gray. Like, it's just inevitable. That's what's going on. So given that, for a person to say, well, conspiracy theories are dangerous, like, and to make a broad-reaching statement like that, it's like, oh, so you don't believe in any conspiracy theory? Inevitably, they will. They'll just say, I don't consider them conspiracy theories, because they're using the term conspiracy theory to mean something different. Not to literally mean a theory involving a conspiracy. They're using it to imply, obvious bullshit, unprovable tinfoil hat stuff, right? So for someone like me that says, listen, I differentiate what I would call a conspiracy theory, saying I think there is a conspiracy of government officials or institutional officials that are putting their thumb on the scale, versus we hate all Jewish people because all Jewish people run the world. But a person might be like, where do you draw the line? Why is that's double standard? You find your conspiracy to be acceptable, but not theirs. Well, because mine's not judging people based on immutable characteristics, and mine's dealing with specific instances that I could point to and show, right? But you understand what I'm saying? It does become difficult. It's true. It seems to have a bit of hypocrisy to say, well, how can you say that your conspiracy theory isn't dangerous and shouldn't be judged as dangerous, but those people's are? It gets difficult. That's true.
I would say if you asked a Jewish person, they would say conspiracy theories are generally dangerous because you can go back hundreds of years. Karl Marx saying the only way to get rid of capitalism is to get rid of Jewish bankers and things of that nature. And you could see the middleman management stereotype being put on Jewish people a lot over the last 2 centuries. So I could say if somebody is at the receiving end of a lot of the violence that does result from some of these conspiracy theories, I could see how they could make that generalization very easily.
Well, but I could make like, do you think that there are institutional biases against white people?
Some, especially, I mean, affirmative action. So yes, absolutely.
And let's say this: do you think that you don't have to agree with this, but I won't bury the lead. I think that there is an underreporting of hate crimes against white people because I think that there is a hesitancy to call crimes against white people a hate crime. Do you think that there's any possibility of truth to that?
Uh, Absolutely, because in a lot of places, white people aren't considered a protected class. So they're not a
Right.
class you could actually be hateful toward. So not
Right.
everywhere, but somewhere, yeah, absolutely.
So when you say Jewish people per capita are more likely to be victims of violent crime, it's hard to judge that because how many crimes occur to people because they are white, which would be a hate crime against white people, but it's not counted that way because they're considered the majority. And so the local prosecutors or whatever don't consider that a hate crime. So if we say that it's hard to determine that, well, maybe white people are close or have surpassed Jewish people in hate crimes per capita, right? Then if your statement's true, that's like, well, Jewish people might tend to say conspiracy theories are dangerous because of the abuse they get. You could say the same of white people. They could say, well, the conspiracy theory of systemic racism has led me to believe that there's some danger to all conspiracy theories.
Yeah, I'm just saying there is some merit behind it. And I'm more kind of giving you a little bit of prep for that guy you're going to be debating on Monday.
Well,
Because, like,
trust me, he's he's you already sound 50 times more intelligible than he'll sound, I assure you.
and you can go with Tyler, by the way. I don't give a shit about using my first name.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, I didn't know what it. I'll be honest. Most people that have pseudonyms, I try to never learn their real name because some people don't want their real name out there. And so if we're having a private like DM and you're like, "Yeah, my name's Jim," I'll slip up while we're talking and say Jim. So I always just go whatever's on screen. I beat that into my own head. Then I don't have to worry about slipping up and.
Yeah, it's just the amount of syllables. That being said, if you ever wanted to switch your credit card processing, then I'd give you my business name. But other than that, I
Oh,
try to keep
okay,
it
okay,
offline.
good, good. So, yeah, I would be happy to talk. I know you want to talk to me about interventionism someday, but that's probably going to be a longer conversation. So, yeah, I'll reach out to you. Usually, the days that work best for me, even though I'm at work, I'm off the clock on Mondays and Tuesdays. A lot of times when I'm at home with a toddler, it's hard for me to keep commitments. But any day that would work for you, Eastern time in the evening after 8 o'clock, we could try to set something up here in the next week or two, and I'd be happy to talk. It doesn't have to be a knockdown, drag out debate, but it can be if you want. I don't care.
No,
But yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So
Tuesday's best for me. Yeah, I'll let Sky
okay.
jump in before you get Pisco in here because it's going to probably turn into a
Oh, is
shit
Pisco
fest.
coming in? Cool. All right, man. We'll talk to you later. That was Average Debate Enjoyer. Do you have a channel you want to shout out?
Average debate enjoyer on YouTube.
All right, and also on Twitter, I know. So
Yep, yep.
all right,
Take
thanks.
her easy.